middle, and we're going to continue with the 14th century. And primarily, we're talking about Germany at this point. Jews have already been expelled from England. That's the year 1290. They are expelled after 3 expulsions, but like the final one, which includes the bulk of France, that's so in 1394. So, you know, we could see what's happening, how the Jews are gradually going to be pushed out of their countries. In a lot of cases, you know, through expulsions and not voluntarily, but sometimes voluntarily, you'll see they're going to start migrating more and more eastward. So what we had done last time, we sort of focused, I mean, we talked in general what was happening, all sorts of different movements that occurred, both in France, obviously, and in Germany, that led to the fact that Jews were going to constantly being expelled from area to area, always being blamed. So in addition to the usual accusations, you know, the blood libels, the host desecration, now is going to be added the poisoning of the wells. So it's already in their mind, even before the Black Death, the bubonic plague hits Europe. So we're talking about smack in the middle of that 14th century, around 1350, lasts for several years. And we mentioned that there are estimates that close to a third to 1/2 of the entire European population actually died as a result of this plague. But, you know, they're fearful. They don't understand anything about disease, how it travels, how it goes from person to person. So they're already so used to blaming the Jews for everything. They add this on, and how are they accusing? They're saying, "Oh, well, you poisoned the wells." You know, what's the source of this plague? There's something in the water. Now, of course, the Jews are also drinking the same water supply, but they weren't affected to quite the extent as the general population. When we talked about the fact, just because of, you know, of halacha, actually, and how we're supposed to keep our, you know, our homes very clean. Another point, I didn't mention it last time, is that we also bury our dead very fast. And if you leave bodies lying around, that's another way to spread disease. And they weren't doing that, you know, in the Christian societies. They would let the bodies pile up. I mean, ultimately they would bury them, but they didn't like remove them from the homes right away. And, you know, we even wash the bodies, you know, so we're very careful, you know. It dates back to the days of Tumah and Tara, you know, and that's why, you know, we take such rapid care of those who die in our midst. But again, and as a result, now let's think of it. So Jews are still living in France actually at this time, but it seems to be affecting the Jews of Germany the most somehow. Maybe there weren't as many Jews who, even with all the expulsions, even bothered going back to France. Maybe some of them had already moved to Germany and they decided to stay there. So again, but they're going to be expelled from region to region to region. It's the Holy Roman Emperor. It's not a strong central authority anymore in Germany at this point, as it had been in prior times, and as it will be from Bismarck moving forward. The Jews, I mean, can you imagine? I mean, I'm thinking of us, you know, as Jewish women, the upheaval of your households constantly, you know, you have to pack up your children, your pots and pans, you know, what other household goods, and this constant state of fear. So why do people die? You know, some of these Rabbanim I see do live into like their 70s, but I am sure, you know, the terrible stress, I mean, must have been just horrendous. I say there are no records from, so to speak, like civilians, you know, and certainly no women writers that have come down from this age. I think the first one, well, we'll hear at a later point, is Gluckle of Hamelin, you know, but at this time period, we have no records. So the only way we know actually how it's affecting the Jewish community are sometimes through the various Rabbanim. We're not even talking about secular leaders. It's the writings from the Rabbanim, and that's how we glean, you know, what's happening within their Jewish communities. Another point I just want to reemphasize so you understand is really the tremendous importance of the growth of cities. All right, this goes throughout the medieval world. It's going to be a means by which power will ultimately be wrested from the kings, the monarchs, and the noblemen. And power is going to, and that will also lead obviously to the growth of the middle class. Now it's interesting, Jews will be part and parcel, but we're always outside of society. You know, we're talking about, you know, the majority Christian inhabitants, you know, and, you know, they will, you know, again, through their middlemen, through their businessmen, you know, they will gradually wrest control of these countries. The Jews are caught in the middle. They have already now been for centuries have been taxed, you know, to the nth degree. They're only allowed primarily to engage in money lending. They do engage, obviously, some artisan things, minor little peddling type jobs, but primarily they earn their money through money lending. And the bulk of that money then are collected as taxes by the rulers. So as we're up until now, it would have gone to the ruling monarch or the ruling nobleman of a certain region. Now, a lot of that money is going to be siphoned off to the town councils. They say, why should the money go to the emperor? We need, you know, the money's being earned here, you know, in our town. So we're going to collect the taxes. So, you know, the emperor still has to get his due, right? A certain amount, or the nobleman, but a lot of the money is going to then be used in the town. It's not going to go to the benefit, the welfare of the local population. It's going to be kept by these wealthy townspeople, you know, to these town councilmen. And again, throughout this time period, besides just obviously accusing the Jews of all these heinous crimes that they feel that they've imagined, and that, you know, they are actually physically attacking the Jews, tremendous loss of life. You know, I notice a lot of the writers don't emphasize this, but I can assure you there were rapes that were occurring this time period. That's why this mixed into our, so to speak, Jewish blood. We, you know, there are other ethnic groups, you know, that you can find sometimes if you're doing like a DNA, you know, search. And as I say, just awful. You know, I read this. Obviously, there were some periods where things were more stable, but I just feel that there was this terrible climate of fear, you know, that they were living under constantly. I mean, their stress level must have been, you know, unbelievably high. There was, and I'm in Germany now, I'm talking about that, that apparently, so we know, again, the Black Plague, the bubonic plague, that's the year 1350. Okay, tons of attacks upon the Jews, accusations, all right, massacres. There was also between the years 1380 and 1390, actually some of the lower classes within the towns rose up. I mean, you can imagine, I mean, they're poverty stricken themselves. And, you know, who are they rising up against? So their main focus is against those town councilmen who are taking all the money for themselves. But then it's always going to be twisted around, and ultimately the Jews are going to be blamed. And part of it reminds me when I learned about the pogroms in Russia in the 19th century. I mean, really, a lot of the attacks started off because they were angry at the Tsar and the noblemen, and, you know, and it gets twisted around. Oh no, you know, really not telling. It's those evil, those devil Jews. And then that's it. So it was almost like a way of like unleashing, right, their anger, but directing it towards the usual suspects. And part and parcel of this is that not just are we attacking the Jews, we are killing them, we are demolishing their homes, we are stealing their goods. But any debts owed to them, they're now all going to be abrogated, you know. So this was a way of sort of like mollifying, I think, the mobs. And I don't think there was that much money actually owed to these poor people, or they probably had little tiny debts that they were owed. But this really went as a way to make the townspeople, the councilmen happier. Well, we don't have to pay any debts, against these Jews. So it was a good way to turn against them. I actually had a source here. There was, to me, this name sounds almost Polish, but it was an Emperor Wenceslas, and apparently he canceled all the debts, period, that the nobility owed to the Jews. All right. Now it's interesting, at this time period, or at least as a policy for all of Germany, even though that they are impoverishing the Jews among them, it's going to take them a while to recoup whatever wealth they have, and then again start that vicious cycle, the money lending, the accusations against them, then abrogation of their debts, et cetera, et cetera. But they don't actually want them to leave the country because they're a great source of revenue. So even though some Jews might have made some official applications to emigrate, they were not always permitted to do so. I mean, obviously, eventually they do, because they do leave. Let me just make sure I covered everything. Again, you can just see how this resentment is constantly building up in the general populace, and always it's turned again to blame the Jews. Now, I'm going to, again, remember I told you, there are no sources other than what we know about certain key rabbonim. So I'm going to be mentioning a lot of names of rabbis. There's no way to remember them, but you'll see like a broader picture, of what's going on. Okay, so the first individual whose name I want to mention, this is actually a Rav from France, the latter part before they will be expelled. And this is about the year 1360. So the chief Rav there was a Rabbi, Matisyahu ben Yosef. It's called Treves. I don't know, perhaps Treves is a city in France. His official years are 1325 to 1387. He apparently had a good relationship with the French king. That was Charles V. Again, they're Charles. You'll see they're Charleses in the Holy Roman Empire too. So I might, when I'm talking about Germany, I might talk about a Charles, but this is a French king. And again, he liked this Rabbi Matisyahu. They got along well. He made him the chief rabbi of Paris in the year 1363. So apparently at that time, there was a little more stability. Remember, they're going to be expelled again in 1394, but there's this like sort of interim period. Things are a little bit better. And he actually reopens some yeshiva, and there's a certain measure of learning going on. Now it's interesting. Germany doesn't have any really great scholars from this time period. There's actually going to be a movement of Jews, more prominent Jews, to Austria, and Vienna is going to be a great center then for Jewish learning. Now remember, we're really at the very end, the Tosfot period. Tosfots are really more like 11th through the 12th centuries. So in the 13th century, or certainly into the 14th century, what they're doing, they are reviewing the Tosfot materials, perhaps organizing it, refining it. Reminds me of the time period, what we call the Savoraim. They follow the Amoraim. The Amoraim are the rabbis of the Gemara. And in general, we feel like the Gemara was redacted about the year 450. But until we hit the Gaonic period, which is the year 600. So in between, so that 450 up until the year 600, we have Rabbanim whose name, some have come down to us. They're not, like extremely well known. These are called the Savoraim, and their task, again, first of all, the Gemara was huge, but to go through it, refine it, certain passages that weren't clear enough to sort of rewrite them. Maybe they rearrange a bit some of the material. I mean, the bulk of it was already established by that year 450, but they spent like the next 150 years reviewing it, until it's has come down to the form that we have it to this day. I mean, there's still some areas that are disputed, but the bulk of the material, what was set already. So what a lot of these Rabbonim now, into this 14th century, well, again, they are just more like collating some of the material that is written and is included in Tosfos. And again, maybe adding some things. I mean, we'll see they did come out, some of them with their own works, but their own works were often a compilation of halacha that was already established in the prior generation. Okay. Now, there were two areas that were of concern towards the end of the 14th century, and that had to do with the position of the Rav, right, of a community. So what the first thing that they were concerned with was the fact that within all this chaos, obviously the level of learning had gone down, and a lot of charlatans, unfortunately, were going about, saying that they were rabbis and that they, were looking for positions in different communities, but really they didn't have the background. They were not qualified. So there was a movement, again, towards the end of the century to sort of have some sort of an approval board that would sanction that, an individual who claimed to be a Rav really was of the stature that he had the sufficient knowledge to actually, be called the Rav, all right? And it's sort of what we have today, that we have different institutions that grant smicha, okay? But it's very chaotic at this time period. So I'm going to mention in particular a Rav from Vienna. Okay? His name is Rabbi Meir ben Baruch Halevi. He lived from 1320 to 1390. And apparently for that era, he was like the most respected Rav of that time period. He actually was a Rav in Vienna for 30 years, from 1360 till he died in the year 1390. And everybody acknowledged him as being a great scholar and leader, of the Jewish community. Apparently even in the Spanish, world, they knew of him and respected him. So now he began the idea, the concept that we have to somehow have certain standard credentials by which to determine who deserves to have that title of Rav. And obviously he's so well respected that what he's going to promulgate will ultimately, be accepted and go passed down through the generations after. So he said nobody could receive the title of Rav. His actually will be called Moreno, unless he has a letter attesting to his ability, right, to stand as Rav and adjudicate, various decisions in halacha. And it had to come from another reputable Rav who has, so to speak, interviewed this man, tested him, and deems him, that he has the proper qualifications to be Rav. But without that document, this individual could not be hired, so to speak, by a community to be their Rav. So it's sort of, it was a revival of what is known as smicha, right? That a guarantee, again, from another respected Rav attesting to the qualifications of this individual. And at that point, it also became the norm to address a Rav as Morenu, right? Our teacher, because it was a very important role that the Rav would have had in the community. And it's amazing, that people were willing to adopt this. Again, I see he was a highly respected individual. As things were chaotic. Obviously, there must have been some very bad experiences in certain communities that they hired an individual as Rav, and that this man ended up being an ignoramus. So I'm sure, the Jewish communities in general were more than happy to have some certain standards put into place. And whatever, it's now continued down now, all these hundreds of years afterwards. There was another issue that also came to the fore at this time period, and that was, how was the rabbi to earn a living? Now, we think back to all those Rabbanim, the Tanaim for the time period of the Mission, the Rabbanim from the Amoraim for the time period of the Gemara. And even when, look a man like Rashi, Rambam, they all earned a living doing something else. Their income was not coming from being a Rav, either as head of a yeshiva or just the main Rav in a certain region. But they were merchants, they were vintners, God knows. I mean, many, many different occupations. But again, this is a very impoverished time period. So again, a decision was made at this time period, right towards that end of that 14th century, that a Rav of a community was to be paid. It's interesting when the Rambam writes, about the position of a Rav, he took the position, oh no, you should not pay him. This word, well, as we know, unfortunately does happen. They think you own the rabbi, you tell him what to do, so that, but at this juncture in time, I mean, these men had no other way to earn a living. I mean, times were so very bad economically, so that it was considered a viable alternative, that the community was responsible that the Rav received a decent salary, upon which to live. So both these key things come into play, at the end of the 14th century. All right, let me just make sure I included everything I wanted to say here. Okay, I think basically I have. And before we move into the 15th century, let me just check out one more thing here. Okay. Oh, there's one other individual. I don't think I talked about him as much. Also from Vienna. His name is, I don't think it's the same person. Let me just check. Because I get things from different sources. So I just want to make sure that I have the right one. No, this is a different person from Vienna. His name was Rabbi Yitzchak. Oh, he's actually from a bit earlier into the 13th century. But I did want to bring him. He wrote a book called Or Zarua. I mean, even I've heard of it. I don't know how. I have heard of this particular sefer. And what he did, remember I told you, this is sort of at the end of the time period of the Tosfos. There's not going to be a lot of new additional material, but a lot of compilation of Judaic knowledge. So in this book, he's going to pull together all the halachic decisions, that have been made in the prior era of the Tosfos, those 200 or so years. He arranged it according to the order of the Gemaras, right, as we have them. And he included in this book, I mean, he obviously gives credence, to his predecessors or perhaps other contemporaries of his time period who made certain halachic decisions. And he's writing it in a very organized fashion. And then his son took on that responsibility.
Malka, what was his name?
Yeah, let me just write it down. It's called Rabbi Yitzchak of Vienna.
Okay.
I don't have his exact dates. It was from the late 12th to the mid 13th century that he lived. All right, and then then the other famous Rav though from Vienna, that's at Rabbi Meir Halevi. All right, and he was the rabbi of Vienna from 1360 to 1390. Okay, I think that's important. So we're now at the end of that 14th century, the most horrible century. I don't know that things improved so greatly, but there is still going to be attacks. There will still be those awful expulsions. So just think, by that we come to the end of the 14th century. There are no longer Jews living in England. There are no longer Jews allowed to live in France. You see, they're being pushed. Now these are, again, they're Ashkenazim. And believe me, in the condition of the Jews in Spain is obviously going to be deteriorating. So where are these people going to be moved from? Don't forget, within Germany, they're also being expelled from region to region. Maybe then after 10 years, they can go back to their original homes, but just terrible people. So that's how they're going to go gradually eastward. And of course, and as I read it, I feel like I want to say to them, oh, don't go to Poland, don't go to Lithuania. But, at that time, the opportunity was good for them. And, look, we did live there for hundreds of years, but oh my God, how it all ended so horribly. So, I don't know, where should they have gone? I mean, that was really the issue. And then soon after, the Jews are going to be expelled from Spain and Portugal, and they're going to need to find places to go to. So again, I honestly don't know how people lived in those days. It's, mean, even if you think about the Holocaust, and believe me, I think that's the culmination of the most horrible of events. But it was basically 1933 to 1945. I mean, we're talking here about, 2 centuries of just horrendous living. Constant upheaval and attacks and whatever. Just, it's hard to read about this, to live, how they clung to their Judaism. I mean, certainly we do know here and there people did convert. They thought that would make their lives better. Maybe it did. I don't know. But the great majority, cling to their Judaism. They look up to the Rabbanim, for leadership, and whatever. I guess somehow life goes on, right? Even under the most difficult of circumstances. So now I'm going to talk a bit more about the Jews in the 15th century. As primarily, again, they're not in England anymore. They're not in France anymore. And what happened to them then throughout the 15th century? And how are they going to end up, obviously, in Poland, Lithuania? Now, when I talk, I'm saying to you, I'm talking about the Jews of Germany, Austria. This also includes Jews in Bohemia, like around Prague, that area. Just think about even with Hitler. Remember, how did he start off? Like he takes over the Sudetenland. Oh, well, there are these, ethnic Germans who live there. So, it just, if you could kind of think of even, believe me, he was against the Jews, of course, but these migration of German Jews are going eastward, all right? So again, I will be giving you a lot of different Rabbanim's names, but this is only material. These are the only sources we have for this time period. Okay, I'm going to do a separate unit on just the Jews of Italy. They were sort of semi-protected living there, but, they're unique. They're not exactly Ashkenazim. They're not Sephardim. They have their own unique heritage. I don't know if I ever mentioned this to you. So I went with my son Shalom to Rome. It goes back a number of years ago. And I remember davening in the main synagogue in Rome. I could not follow anything they said except when they said Kaddish. I couldn't understand, I was their Hebrew pronunciation. They have all these piyutim. Believe me, in Shalom's shul, the Spanish, Portuguese, Shalom always says to me, Ma, don't show up till at least past 9:30. Because like the first hour, that's all they're doing is saying these piyutim. So very, very different. But I couldn't understand their Hebrew. I could not find my place. You usually can walk into any shul. I can even go into Shalom's shul and I can kind of figure out where they are, but not in Italy. Okay. Now again, there are going to be some key rabbinic leaders. They're not all like famous. I'll tell you when they are. People have really come down in history as acknowledged rabbinic leaders. But again, we learned something about what's going on in that 15th century. Okay, so the first person whose name I want to mention to you, somebody who came initially from Vienna, but he settled in another town, and he's called Rabbi Shalom of Neustadt. And it's actually, Neustadt was the town Wiener Neustadt. Now, I'm not positive if this is Germany or Austria, because at that point, there is no real distinction. I mean, we're saying, let's say Austria or something, but it was like one big country. That's also why Hitler had his Anschluss, right? Okay. He actually went by the name, and I remember his first name was Shalom, Rabbi Shalom. He was called Sar Shalom, which means like a prince of peace. I think the Christians use that term, I forget, but whatever. He had, this was a Hebrew designation for him. Apparently also a brilliant man, tremendous knowledge of halacha, obviously a man of a great character, highly respected, and I don't know if he had a yeshiva, but he certainly had certain other individuals who were gathered to him, learned under him, or he was a mentor, to other individuals. And one of his key mentors, I'll mention him in between somebody else. His name is the Maharil. Okay, but we'll learn more about him soon. Now, my goal in giving this whole course was to see how did the oral law develop over the years. So I think it's important to see each one builds upon the other. like we could say that like, the Rambam, like he's this key personality and tremendous organizer of material, so that's like a key moment in time. And then eventually we're to learn about Rabbi Yosef Karo, also Sephardic Jew, about who wrote his monumental Shulchan Aruch when he lived in the city of Tzvat. Okay, well, what's about in between? So that's why all these men, we have to give credence, and thanks to these Rabbanim who kept on their tradition, still, like I mentioned before, compiling the materials, recording all the various customs, the responsa, the questions of their day, and that then led to the next giant who would organize all the material to his date, and obviously, like with Rabbi Yosef Karo, I mean, that is the standard for halacha, in the entire Jewish world. Okay, so just wanted to mention this man. So again, you see a key Rav who's living most like, it sounds to me, like in Austria. Okay, another individual from this time. Now, this man is from Prague, all right? And his name is Rabbi Yom Tov Lipman Milhausen. I know it's Yom Tov Lipman Heller. I remember hearing about him, but this is a different individual. And apparently he was a Dayan. He was the chief judge, rabbinic judge in the Prague, again, towards the end of that 14th century into the early 15th century. Again, we don't have exact dates for his life. Now, what he's known for is that he wrote a very, fiery defense of Judaism against Christian accusations, which of course, have been going on. We've already learned about some of these great disputations, certainly, the one that was in Paris, and then the one that the Ramban is going to be gauging, and there are going to be others later. So he decided to write a book with all the cogent arguments against whatever, the Catholic authorities are, accusing the Jews of, and just show the validity of Judaism. The name of the book is Sefer HaNitzachon. And again, it's like a refutation of a lot of the proofs that the Christians, I don't know if you've ever taken the time to do this, but, they feel like there are a lot of, sentences, phrases in Tanakh that sort of allude to the coming of Yashka. But if you would ever read these and you put them in the context of, let's say, a lot of them are coming from Yeshayahu, I mean, we totally see just the Jewish aspect, but they pick these. So, in any case, that was part of what he was trying to refute, okay, and to show the fallacy in their thinking. All right, I found this very interesting. So, for years, this book was around in manuscript form, and then would be passed on from person to person. So, it wasn't actually printed, and the Christian authorities actually were afraid of it because apparently it was so brilliantly written and brought up such amazing arguments against it that they certainly didn't want any widespread distribution. But apparently the year 1654, some monk translated it. Again, I don't know if these things are being written in Hebrew, most likely. And then he published it with some of his own notes. But, when a lot of the Christian perhaps, get a little wider distribution. The church was so actually afraid that more and more people should see it, that there was a papal edict that even the Jews weren't able to keep a copy of this book. Okay, so again, we've already been in Austria, we've gone to Prague, and now I'm going to tell you a little bit more. Well, I'm still continuing with this Rabbi Yom Tov from Prague. In the year 1399, okay, so we're just on the cusp of going into the 15th century, he was arrested and with many other Jews, and he's thrown into prison. And this was all done by a Jewish apostate. So many of those cases, it's an apostate who is alerted, the church to, to certain, statements that the Jews or the Rabbanim have made, and then whatever. It's just really pretty shameful. His name was Peter, and he accused them of insulting Christianity in their writings. Apparently, there was a trial, and this Rabbi Yom Tov, just like the Ramban, also who gives such a brilliant, discourse, well, it was a trial of the Talmud, but he was the chief person arguing on behalf of Judaism. So this Rabbi Yom Tov, again, he was this brilliant man. Remember, I told you they didn't want his works to be promulgated any place and distributed. So, but he spoke so well, so if I, so to speak, so at the trial, it was proven really there was nothing, whatever Peter said, this Rabbi Yom Tov had enough things to counter attack. But all those other 80 people who had been arrested for him, they were still executed. And somehow, again, no details, I don't have them, but somehow this Rabbi Yom Tov managed to escape. Now, again, he was obviously this recognized halachic authority of his day. He was also a Kabbalist. I'm going to do it as a separate unit. I want to show you how the Kabbalah developed and what are some of the key works in Kabbalah were. But just know this man was a Kabbalist, right? The Ramban was also. He wrote a book on the hidden Kabbalistic meanings and forms of the Hebrew alphabet. They put a big emphasis on that. Every Hebrew word, letter has special significance. Right? That's part of Kabbalah. In any case, his book was called Alpha Besa, and it was apparently a very popular book. Do you ever notice also, if you're reading the Art Scroll Chumash, at the end of the Parsha, they always sort of put in, some of these things about the letters or whatever. That's Kabbalah. In any case, he was also wrote about the tefillot, our prayers, interpreted them. And he even wrote a special commentary just on the Shir HaYichud, which we say at the end of Shabbos Davening. Okay, now I want to talk about another place. We're still in, I still think of it as Czechoslovakia. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore. But that western part, the Czech Republic. So we talked about Prague. Now I want to talk about just Bohemia. So I don't know what town he came from, but somewhere in that region. And his name was Rabbi Yitzchak Turnau. English, the way I spell it is Tirnau. He lived from the years 1365 to 1428. And again, to show you how, halacha is being preserved and transferred from generation to generation, he actually wrote a book on halacha called Minhagim L'Chol Hashana. Again, Minhagim, custom. So he's recording whatever changes or additions might have been made to halacha in his or maybe even the prior generation. He's recording for posterity, and then it will, at a later date, more authoritative works will be built upon, these various writings. But thanks to him, remember, I told you this is a very deplorable time in Jewish history, and really the level of learning it could not possibly compare to the era of the Tosfos. So it became very popular. I guess it was well, written. So later codifiers, this book was available. They would have gone through it, and then they built their works based on, this Rabbi Turnau's writings. All right. I'm just going to add this because I found this in one of my sources. So it says there's a legend that Rabbi Yitzchak's daughter was actually, unfortunately, kidnapped by a duke, but he subsequently became a sincere convert to Judaism. So just a little bit of interest. Okay. Now I want to talk about the greatest rabbinic figure from this time period. He's known as the Maharil. Okay, his real name is Rabbi Yaakov Halevi Moelin. And I don't know, I have it spelled Moelin. And he lived from the years 1365 to 1427. And he had learned from that Rabbi Shalom, the Sar Shalom man, and was greatly influenced him. But as they say, his stature of a Rav was even on a greater level. Now he's called Maharil. That stands for Morenu Harav Yaakov Levi. Okay, so you have that. Again, he's considered the leading halakhic authority, right, from this, end of the 14th into the beginning of the 15th century. And he wrote a lot about specific customs and synagogue ritual, which had come into play at that time period. Now, apparently he was a Rav in Mainz. Now, Mainz, don't forget that we're talking about that Rhineland area and Worms. So those are both that part. So that part of Germany, way up, northwestern corner of Germany. And but I think he might have moved at a later date, but he's associated with those two communities. All right. And again, he is now going to be this main conduit, connecting link between, from the Tosfos period, that horrible 14th century. But meanwhile, Jews are living their lives as best they can. Certain minhagim are coming into play. Certain halachos need to be somehow adapted to the times. Different questions come up as a result of different things going on in their world. And so later generations will, again, base their key works on his, okay? And later on, I told you Rabbi Yosef Karo is the one who writes the Shulchan Aruch, but that's sort of given more like a Sephardic slant. So then we have later on in Europe, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, the Ramah, and he writes the authoritative Ashkenazic version of the Shulchan Aruch, okay? So the Ramah would have had access to the writings of this Maharil and incorporated them in his standard work, okay? Let me see what else I want to tell you about him. Okay, so again, Maharil obviously did not live in very pleasant times either. Apparently in the year 1420, there were, I'll tell you about, there was this Hussite rebellion. Hussite, it's from a man, his name is John Huss, Huss. Maybe you remember him from learning world history. So in the year 1420, I mean, the Hussite war rebellion lasts from 1420 to 1436. And what it was a movement obviously promulgated by this man, John Huss, in which he criticizes the Roman Catholic Church and for a lot of their practices. It's sort of like a precursor to Martin Luther and the actual Protestant Reformation, which won't though be till 17. It will be at a later date. And when we go, into the 16th century, I'll have to talk to you about Luther and his attitude towards the Jews. But anyways, at this point, we're talking about this man, John Huss. He actually was arrested and hanged, early on, but the rebellion, his followers, it will continue for a good 6 years. Meanwhile, obviously, a lot of massacre of Jews. Naturally, here you would think it's this internecine war between two Christian elements, but of course, they're always going to blame the Jews somehow. We're somehow responsible for their problems. So, the Jews of Austria was like a bloodbath at that time period. It was really quite horrible. Some accused the Jews that we were giving the Hussites arms and money for the rebellion. I'm sure maybe there were some people. I mean, you never know, but it's not like the whole population was back in. But they couldn't have cared less, I'm sure, about the whole thing. And then there was also this accusation that this is a reminder of that host desecration. That the Jews were accused of. That somehow Christian woman was bribed and she supplied, some Jewish community with some wafers, and then they were like desecrating it. Whatever. It's just awful. It's like they can never get out of that mindset that they had. So again, there was an attack upon the Jews, and many of those poor Jews in Vienna, actually, they lost everything. Now, this reminded me of what happens years later in the 1940s in Budapest. It says that a lot of the Jews were forced onto these boats on the Danube River, and they were not given any oars, and they drifted off to oblivion. All right, and then a lot of the wealthier Jews were actually rounded up. They took them to outside the city. They made this huge bonfire, and that's how they killed them. They burned them alive. So then it makes me think of those Spaniards. It's like each country, each generation seems to learn from the horrible, activities of the prior one and uses always against the Jews. Naturally, the town council takes charge of all their property now if these Jews are no longer around anymore, and the king gets his share as well. Okay, and here a little bit more I had learned about what happened then, that they actually took the stones of the synagogue, they destroyed it, and presented it to the university for a new building. Why? What? It was a way of saying thank you to the part that the students had played in organizing the riots. How nice. So they took apart, this demolished shul, gave it to the university, whose students had been involved, in attacking the Jews, and said, oh, you can build yourselves a nice new building from it. Apparently, for 100 years after, no Jews lived in Vienna. That's really interesting. And as a result, these Christian merchants, they were so happy to get rid of the Jews that they had all the business to themselves. All right, so I told you this Hussite war does go on for a 16-year time period, and then eventually we're wiped out, by the Catholic Church. Let's see, even that community of Wiener Neustadt, now that is Germany, it too was destroyed at this time period, and apparently there were dozens and dozens of Jewish communities that were just wiped out during this era. And again, so this is just so you can explain to you and to understand how Jews will eventually start migrating eastward. They want to escape. There's no stability in their lives whatsoever. And at this juncture in time, things are looking good. They actually will be invited in, and that's how they're going to end up in Poland and Lithuania. All right. Now the Mahario was actually, was living at this time period. They appealed to him to, that he should pray to God, to save them. So people claimed a 3-day fast. Now we're coming up to Purim, so remind you, right? It's a Tanis Esther. And eventually the armies, those who were coming to attack the Jews did disperse and, left them alone. Let's see, I think I have time. I'll talk about one more Rav, and then I'm going to conclude this. His name is Rabbi Yaakov Weil. W-E-I-L. He lived from 1390 to 1455. He's known as the Mahariv. But remember the Maharil. He's like a key person to remember from this time period. He was a rabbi in Augsburg and Erfurt. These are both German towns. I actually have a map here. Let me just see if I can remember where some of these. Augsburg, I don't know how to pronounce it. That's in Bavaria. That's southeastern Germany. Erfurt's actually more to the north. So he got positions, in different communities over his lifetime. And apparently at one point he was actually offered to be the Rav in Nuremberg, which I think a much larger, more established city. But there was already a scholar there who was living there who had that position. So he didn't want to come in and take away that man's parnassa, and become the Rav in his place. So he turned them down. I mean, it shows you something about the character of this individual. Now, at this point, he's considered the greatest rabbinic authority in Germany. And many, many shilohs came to him. There were a lot of responses have come out from this time period. And again, he's living after the time period of the Maharil. So that's why he's now a key rabbinic figure. He wrote a book of these responsa. It's called Shelot Teshuvot Mahariv, right? Questions that had come to him and the answers he gave. Apparently it's very widely accepted. And he wrote a lot of his Teshuvot had to do with kashrus. So he's known as a foremost authority especially of shechita, ritual slaughter. And it became a very authoritative source for later generations in Eastern Europe, right? And so we have that has come down to us. So I'm going to continue next time with some more additional Rabbonim from this time period. Again, it's our only way of gleaning what's happening, to the Jewish communities. And it's interesting, the questions that they are dealing with, what they're wrestling with, and what their responses are at the same time period. So